Hello and welcome to the Deep Dive.
Hello.
Today we are digging into some really rich material excerpts from the major works of Benedictus de Spinoza.
Yes, we've got selections here from the Theologico-Politicus, the Political Treatise, his work on the improvement of the understanding, and of course the big one, the Ethics, all compiled by Joseph Ratner.
It's definitely dense stuff, but our mission today is to kind of crack it open, navigate this pretty profound philosophical system.
And pull out the core ideas, right? See how his thinking, which seemed so radical, even abstract back then, why it's seen as so foundational now.
Exactly. And maybe even find some, practical insights for understanding the world, ourselves, society, perhaps even a different way to think about freedom.
Sounds like a plan. Where should we start? With the man himself.
Let's do that. The sources give us a picture of Spinoza in, 17th century Amsterdam? A Jewish man in a complex situation.
Yeah, circumspection was key, apparently. He couldn't just say anything. It was a tricky environment.
But he had this incredible education, right? Exposed to Descartes, modern science.
Yeah.
Figures like Francis van den Ende are mentioned.
That definitely gave him the intellectual toolkit. He was engaging with the cutting edge of thought for his time.
And yet there's this detail in the sources. He valued simple things like good food, drink, art.
Right. But the work always came first. Philosophy over everything. Even though his income was, well, slender, as the source puts it, he wasn't chasing wealth.
That focus, that discipline.
Yeah.
It feels very much in line with his philosophy, doesn't it?
It really does. And his life wasn't easy. Excommunicated by the Jewish community, vilified by Gentiles.
Quite the rough ride. It's amazing how perceptions changed, now seen almost as saintly. The source calls him a prophet in Israel for mankind.
From outcast to, something like a philosophical prophet. Quite a journey.
Okay, let's talk about his writing, specifically the Ethics. That geometrical format. It can be intimidating.
Definitely. It looks like a math textbook.
Why did he do that? Was he just trying to be difficult?
Actually, no. The source says the opposite. He chose that method for clarity, for precision.
Clarity through geometry.
He wanted to cut through all the vague, maybe confusing language of older philosophy, build his system rigorously, like proving theorems. The source even hints that if we simplify our own thinking, it helps us get his ideas.
Okay, so precision and clarity were the goals. And that precision reflects his view of the world itself, right? A world of necessity.
Exactly. This leads us straight to his concept of God, or nature. For Spinoza, they're one and the same. A single, infinite substance.
And everything else just follows.
Necessarily. From the very nature of this divine substance, infinite things must follow in infinite ways. God doesn't choose to act. God acts from the laws of God's own nature.
So God isn't compelled by anything outside.
Nothing. Which makes God the only truly free cause, because God is only determined by God's own internal necessity, God's own essence.
This is his determinism. Everything happens because it must happen based on primary causes.
Yes, but it's crucial to understand what kind of determinism. The sources distinguish it from, say, arbitrary fate. It's not random. It's that all events follow from specific causes within a fixed, immutable natural order.
Like the analogy of the stone in the source. Its motion is determined by the push it received.
Right. The continued motion is necessary given the push and the laws of physics, but it's a different kind of necessity than, say, how properties follow from the essence of a triangle or how things follow from God's nature. It's all causal.
And this focus on cause and effect is why he criticized the idea of final causes.
Precisely. That common human belief, that deep-seated prejudice, as he calls it, that nature, or even God, acts for some purpose or end, usually for our benefit.
Like rainfall so that crops can grow, or eyes exist so that we can see.
Exactly that. He argues this comes from our imagination. We project our own goal-seeking behavior onto the world. We see tools, like eyes, and assume a purpose.
And this leads to superstition, thinking storms are angry gods or something.
Yes, or that good fortune is a reward. It completely overturns the true order of nature, confusing effects for causes. Things don't happen for a reason. They happen from a cause.
Interesting that the source mentions mathematics as offering an alternative way of thinking.
Because mathematics deals with inherent properties and necessary consequences, not with ends or purposes. It was a model of truth for him, free from that human-centered bias.
So bringing this back to us, to you listening, why does this matter? understanding this necessity?
Well, if you grasp that things happen because of a chain of causes within nature, not because of some arbitrary whim or directed purpose aimed at you,
Yeah.
it can really change your perspective.
You stop asking, why me?
Exactly. Or what did I do to deserve this? You start looking for the causes, understanding the process. It can lead to a kind of emotional detachment or maybe objectivity, less taking things personally.
That's a huge shift. Okay, let's move from the cosmos to our own inner world, mind and body. Spinoza had some strong views here too, didn't he?
Very strong. He completely rejected the idea that the mind somehow rules over the body from a specific point, like Descartes' pineal gland theory. The source specifically mentions his critique of that.
So, no little ghost in the machine pulling levers.
Definitely not. He saw mind and body as, well, two sides of the same coin, two attributes expressing the same underlying reality. The order and connection of things happening in the body is the order and connection of thoughts and ideas in the mind.
So the mind is the idea of the body. They're parallel.
Coincident, yes.
Yeah.
What affects the body affects the mind, and vice versa, though he focuses more on body affecting mind in the examples. Our ability to perceive complex things depends on our body's capacity to interact with the world in complex ways.
Experience seems to back that up, right? If you're physically unwell, your thinking gets sluggish.
Exactly. Body tired, body asleep, mind. Well, doing something different. They aren't separate interacting things, but a unified whole expressed in different ways.
And he applied this same kind of rigorous, almost scientific lens to emotions.
Absolutely. The source quotes him saying he wants to study human actions and appetites just as if I were considering lines, planes, or bodies.
Treating feelings like geometry.
In a way, yeah. Not as chaotic disruptions or moral failings, but as natural phenomena governed by laws, just like anything else in nature. He wanted to understand their mechanics.
Okay, let's get into some core concepts from the sources.
Right.
What's kinatis?
Kinatis is fundamental. It's the striving, the effort inherent in everything, including our minds, to persevere in its own being, to keep existing, basically, for an indefinite time.
Like inertia, but for existence itself.
Sort of, yeah.
None of that.
A drive to persist. And when this striving relates just to the mind, he calls it will.
And desire.
Desire is this kinatis, this striving as we are conscious of it. It expresses our very essence, he says, and it can be triggered by almost anything.
And he flips the script on value, doesn't he? We don't desire things because they're good.
We call them good because we desire them. Our desires determine our values, not the other way around. That's a radical psychological insight.
Okay, what about the basic building blocks of emotion? Joy and sorrow.
Simple definitions based on this striving or power. Joy is the passage from a lesser to a greater state of perfection or power.
An increase in your ability to act, basically.
Right. And sorrow is the opposite, passing from a greater to a lesser perfection, a decrease in your power.
And how do love and hatred fit in?
They're joy or sorrow linked to an external cause. Love is joy plus the idea of an external cause. Hatred is sorrow plus the idea of an external cause.
It sounds so logical, almost like emotional physics. The sources list others too. Astonishment, ambition.
Yes, there are quite a few defined. Astonishment is when the mind gets fixed on something new, unrelated to other thoughts. Ambition is an immoderate desire of glory. He notes it tends to strengthen other emotions.
What about things like fear?
Fear is a desire to avoid what seems like the greater of two evils by choosing the lesser. Despondency is thinking too little of ourselves because of sorrow. Then there's audacity, which is desire linked to a danger others fear. Pusillanimity is being held back by a fear others would confront. Consternation is desire paralyzed by astonishment at something feared. And pity is sorrow caused by seeing another's misfortune.
It's like a whole system built from these core elements of striving, power shifts, and perceived causes.
And importantly, the source links these emotions to the first kind of knowledge, imagination, or opinion. They arise from confused ideas, not clear understanding. They can be complex mixtures in things like education, habit, religion. They shape how we express and connect these emotions to actions.
Whether you feel shame or pride about something can depend entirely on your upbringing, for example.
Exactly. But even the most difficult emotions, he argues, are just part of nature's power and workmanship. They aren't alien invaders. They're part of the system.
So for you listening, understanding emotions this way, what's the payoff?
It demystifies them. If they follow laws, if they arise from specific kinds of thoughts and bodily states, then maybe they aren't these uncontrollable forces. Understanding them is the first step towards gaining some power over them, or at least not being ruled by them.
Which brings us to freedom. If everything is necessary, determined, how can we be free? Spinoza's answer isn't about breaking the chains of necessity, is it?
No, not at all. Freedom isn't randomness or acting against nature. For Spinoza, true freedom is being determined by your own nature, specifically your rational nature, rather than being pushed around by external causes or tossed about by passions based on confused ideas.
So freedom is self-determination through reason.
Precisely. It's liberation from external compulsion and internal confusion. And the key to this freedom, this power over emotions, is knowledge.
The sources outline three kinds of knowledge. The first we mentioned, imagination or opinion.
Right. Knowledge from hearsay, random experience, symbols, like knowing your birth date from others or seeing the sun is small and close. It's inadequate, often confused, the source of passion.
And the second kind,
Reason. This comes from having common notions and adequate ideas of the properties of things. Logical deduction, understanding universal principles, scientific understanding, that's reason, clear and distinct.
and the highest level.
The third kind, intuitive knowledge. This is a direct grasp of things as they are in God or nature, flowing from the necessity of the divine essence. It's seeing things under the form of eternity, understanding their necessary place in the whole eternal order. This involves knowing the eternal and infinite essence of God.
Wow. Okay, so how does moving up this ladder of knowledge help us manage those emotions we talked about?
The source explains it quite clearly. When you understand an emotion, a passion, which stems from confused ideas clearly and distinctly, using reason or intuition, it stops being a passion.
It transforms.
Yes, it ceases to be something that passively happens to you and becomes an action of your mind. By understanding its true causes in nature, you effectively detach it from the overwhelming power of its immediate imagined external cause and connect it to your network of clear ideas. This diminishes its force.
Understanding is power, literally.
In this context, absolutely, and this leads to what he calls the intellectual love of God.
Which comes from that third kind of knowledge.
Necessarily. It's the joy, the increase in perfection that comes with understanding God or nature as the eternal necessary cause of all things, grasped through intuition. Because God nature is eternal and immutable, this love, based on understanding, is also constant and eternal, unlike love based on fleeting external objects.
And this knowledge, this intellectual love, this is blessedness.
Yes, and the source is emphatic. Blessedness isn't a reward for virtue doled out later. It is virtue itself. It is the very power of the mind gained through understanding, the ability to moderate harmful desires, lusts. It's the deep peace, the acquiescentia animi that arises from knowing your place in the necessary order of things.
So the wise person, guided by reason and intuition, is less disturbed by life's ups and downs because they understand the underlying necessity.
Exactly. Their strength is their intellect. They understand themselves, their emotions, God, and the world. The ignorant person, driven by passion and opinion, lust, is constantly agitated and essentially enslaved by external forces they don't comprehend.
Virtue isn't a chore. It is happiness and freedom.
That's the core message. Serving God, which means understanding and living according to nature's rational order, is the highest liberty itself.
Okay, let's shift focus slightly. How does this philosophy of individual understanding and freedom translate to living together in society? Spinoza's political thought.
Well, he starts pretty realistically, as the sources show. He doesn't think people are naturally guided by reason.
No. What guides them then?
In the state of nature, desire and power, your natural right extends as far as your power does. What you can do, you have a right to do.
That sounds like a recipe for chaos. Hobbes' war of all against all.
Pretty much. Individuals driven solely by appetite and power inevitably clash and threaten each other's survival, so society becomes necessary.
For self-preservation.
Yes, for security and mutual benefit. This requires people pooling their power into a collective social body, agreeing to live under common laws.
And the sources mention that things like laws and social organization are what distinguish nations, not some inherent national character, using the Hebrews as an example.
Right. The Mosaic Law, for instance, was tailored for the specific governance and temporal well-being of the ancient Jewish state. It wasn't about universal philosophical truth or blessedness in Spinoza's sense.
So in a civil state, why do we obey the laws? Are we just slaves to the state then?
Spinoza argues no. We obey because reason tells us it's the lesser of two evils. Submitting to the sovereign is better than the constant fear and danger of the state of nature. Also, the state aims, ideally, for peace and security, which are rational goals, even if the individuals within it aren't always acting rationally. The sources also say laws work better using hope than just fear.
And what is the ultimate aim of government, according to the sources?
This is where he was really radical for his time. The true aim of government, he says, is liberty.
Liberty. But we disagree. We have to obey the laws.
It's a specific kind of liberty, he means. The sources define it as security for your body and mind, the freedom to use your reason without constraint, and living free from hatred, anger, deception, and mutual antagonism. It's the liberty to flourish as a rational being within a secure state.
That sounds incredibly relevant. What about freedom of thought and speech?
A huge topic in the Theologico Politicus. The sources are clear. Spinoza believed judgment, our inner thoughts and feelings, are fundamentally uncontrollable and thus an inalienable natural right. You can't actually make someone think something different.
So trying to legislate opinions is pointless.
Worse than pointless, it's dangerous, according to the sources. It breeds resentment, hypocrisy, angers the most upright citizens who value truth, and ultimately undermines the state's stability and good faith.
So freedom of judgment, freedom to express your thoughts, it's necessary.
Not just possible without harming peace, but essential for peace and piety, he argues. The only time opinions become seditious is when they directly incite actions that violate the social contract or laws. Just thinking or saying something unpopular isn't a crime against the state.
So there's a balance. Obey actions commanded by law for collective security.
Because that security is ultimately in your rational self-interest.
But the sovereign's power isn't absolute either.
No. Their right is limited by their actual power. They can't command impossible things, and laws that provoke widespread outrage are unenforceable and undermine their own authority. Power depends on consent, or at least acquiescence.
And the sources suggest democracy might be the best system for this.
Yes, because power is more distributed, it's less likely to issue purely irrational commands that alienate the population. It's seen as the form of government most conducive to guiding people towards reason.
Okay, one last big area. His approach to scripture. Very controversial then. Maybe still is for some.
Definitely. He didn't treat the Bible as divinely dictated in the traditional sense. He applied a historical critical method.
Meaning
Meaning you have to understand its history, as the source puts it, the original languages, the authors' lives, their times, their biases, the intended audience. You interpret it like any ancient text.
So you don't just accept anything it says as literal truth.
You accept nothing as an authoritative scriptural statement unless you clearly perceive its meaning in that historical context. The goal is to understand what the text meant, not necessarily whether it's objectively true in a scientific or philosophical sense. Reason assesses that separately. Stick to the literal meaning unless it clearly contradicts fundamental scriptural principles.
And the value of these biblical narratives then, if not always literal history.
They're moral and ethical teachings. They're salutary doctrines, the source calls them. The parts that guide you towards a better, more pious life.
So someone could live a virtuous life based purely on reason and be just as blessed as someone who follows Scripture.
Spinoza argues yes. If you get the doctrines right and live them, you're blessed. The source contrasts this with Maimonides, who apparently said you had to believe the doctrines because they were revealed by prophets. For Spinoza, just believing the stories without the moral transformation is pointless, like reading any other history or drama.
What about prophecy itself? How did he understand that?
As stemming primarily from an unusually vivid imagination, not necessarily superior intellect, the source gives examples: uneducated prophets, Hagar's vision. Prophets received revelation through imaginative means, words, or visions.
But Christ was different.
Yes. The sources say Christ received revelation directly, mind to mind, without the mediation of imagination. A unique case.
And miracles. Things like the sun standing still for Joshua. How did that fit with nature's unbreakable laws?
He didn't see them as violations of nature. Miracles were events whose natural causes were unknown or couldn't be explained by the people witnessing or recounting them. They often reflected the narrator's limited understanding or imagination.
So Joshua's long day wasn't the sun literally stopping, but maybe how the author interpreted an unusually long period of daylight based on their understanding of the cosmos.
That's the kind of interpretation suggested. Many narratives taken as real were perhaps symbolic or imaginative, like God descending from heaven or Elijah ascending in a chariot. The Bible also uses rhetoric, he argues. Hardening Pharaoh's heart just means Pharaoh was obstinate.
And ultimately, miracles don't prove God's existence.
No, Spinoza argues the fixed, immutable, necessary order of nature is a far greater proof of God's existence and perfection than any supposed deviation from that order would be. A miracle would imply God acting against God's own nature, which is impossible for a perfect being.
Wow. Okay, we've definitely covered a lot of ground. From the necessity of nature, God, the mind, emotions.
The path to freedom through understanding, the structure of society, liberty, interpreting scripture. It's a comprehensive system.
Absolutely. And running through it all, it seems, is this central thread. Understanding is key. Understanding the necessary order of nature and our own place within it. That's the route to blessedness, to real freedom.
That really seems to be the heart of it based on these sources. Knowledge, especially that higher intuitive knowledge, transforms everything.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, maybe a thought for you to take away drawn from these texts.
Hmm.
How much of what you consider good or bad, or your explanations for why things happen, might be rooted in your own personal desires, fears, or imagination, rather than a clear-eyed understanding of the necessary causes at play in nature?
Yeah, what might change for you if you really tried to understand things, as Spinoza put it, under the form of eternity, seeing the bigger picture, the necessary connections?
Something to ponder. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.
Thank you.